Abraham Lincoln was an American statesman and lawyer who served as the 16th President of the United States from 1861 to 1865. Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. He was the second child of Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. His father and mother lived in a one-room log cabin on Sinking Spring Farm near Hodgenville, Kentucky. He was a descendant of Samuel Lincoln, an Englishman who migrated from Hingham, Norfolk, to its namesake, Hingham, Massachusetts, in 1638. The family then migrated west, passing through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Lincoln's paternal grandparents, his namesake Captain Abraham Lincoln and wife Bathsheba, moved the family from Virginia to Jefferson County in Kentucky. The captain was killed in an Indian raid in 1786. His children, including 8-year-old Thomas, Abraham's father, witnessed the attack. Thomas then worked at odd jobs in Kentucky and Tennessee before the family settled in Hardin County, Kentucky in the early 1800s. The heritage of Lincoln's mother Nancy remains unclear, but it is widely assumed that she was the daughter of Lucy Hanks. Thomas and Nancy married on June 12, 1806, in Washington County, and moved to Elizabethtown, Kentucky. They had 3 children, Sarah, Abraham, and Thomas, who died an infant. Thomas Lincoln bought or leased farms in Kentucky before losing all but 200 acres of his land in court disputes over property titles. In 1816, the family moved to Indiana where the land surveys and titles were more reliable. Indiana was a free territory, and they settled in an unbroken forest in Hurricane Township, Perry County, Indiana. In 1860, Lincoln noted that the family's move to Indiana was partly on account of slavery, but mainly due to land title difficulties. In Kentucky and Indiana, Thomas worked as a farmer, cabinet maker, and carpenter. At various times, he owned farms, livestock and town lots, paid taxes, sat on juries, appraised estates, and served on county patrols. Thomas and Nancy were members of a separate Baptist church, which forbade alcohol, dancing, and slavery. Overcoming financial challenges, Thomas in 1827 obtained clear title to 80 acres in Indiana, an area which became the Little Pigeon Creek community. On October 5, 1818, Nancy Lincoln succumbed to milk sickness, leaving 11-year-old Sarah in charge of a household including her father, 9-year-old Abraham, and Nancy's 19-year-old orphan cousin, Dennis Hanks. 10 years later, on January 20, 1828, Sarah died while giving birth to a stillborn son, devastating Lincoln. On December 2, 1819, Thomas married Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, with 3 children of her own. Abraham became close to his stepmother, and called her mother. Lincoln disliked the hard labor associated with farm life. His family even said he was lazy, for all his reading, scribbling, writing, ciphering, writing poetry, etc. His stepmother acknowledged he did not enjoy physical labor, but loved to read. Lincoln was mostly self-educated, except for some schooling from was the only child to live to maturity. Edward Baker Lincoln, born in 1846, and died on February 1, 1850, probably of tuberculosis. Lincoln's third son, Willie Lincoln, was born on December 21, 1850, and died of a fever at the White House on February 20, 1862. The youngest, Thomas Dad Lincoln, was born on April 4, 1853, and survived his father but died of heart failure at age 18 on July 16, 1871. Lincoln was remarkably fond of children, and the Lincolns were not considered to be strict with their own. In fact, Lincoln's law partner William H. Herndon would grow irritated when Lincoln would bring his children to the law office. Their father, it seemed, was often too absorbed in his work to notice his children's behavior. Herndon recounted, "I have felt many and many a time that I wanted to wring their little necks, and yet out of respect for Lincoln I kept my mouth shut." Lincoln did not note what his children were doing or had done. The deaths of their sons, Eddie and Willie, had profound effects on both parents. Lincoln suffered from melancholy, a condition now thought to be clinical depression. Later in life, Mary struggled with the stresses of losing her husband and sons, and Robert committed her for a time to an asylum in 1875. In 1832, Lincoln joined with a partner, Denton Offutt, in the purchase of a general store on credit in New Salem. Although the economy was booming, the business struggled and Lincoln eventually sold his share. That March he entered politics, running for the Illinois General Assembly, advocating navigational improvements on the Sangamon River. He could draw crowds as a raconteur, but he lacked the requisite formal education, powerful friends, and money, and lost the election. Lincoln briefly interrupted his campaign to serve as a captain in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. When he returned to his campaign and first speech, he observed a supporter in the crowd under attack, grabbed the assailant by his neck and the seat of his trousers and tossed him. Lincoln finished 8th out of 13 candidates, though he received 277 of the 300 votes cast in the New Salem precinct. Lincoln served as New Salem's postmaster and later as county surveyor, but continued his voracious reading, and he decided to become a lawyer. He taught himself the law, with Blackstone's commentaries, saying later of the effort, "I studied with nobody." Lincoln's second State House campaign in 1834, this time as a Whig, was a success over a powerful Whig opponent. Then followed his 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives for Sangamon County. He championed construction of the Illinois and Michigan Canal, and later was a canal commissioner. He voted to expand suffrage beyond white landowners to all white males, but adopted a free soil stance opposing both slavery and abolition. In 1837 he declared, "The institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, but the promulgation of abolition doctrines tends rather to increase than abate its evils." He echoed Henry Clay's support for the American Colonization Society, which advocated a program of abolition in conjunction with settling freed slaves in Liberia. Admitted to the Illinois bar in 1836, he moved to Springfield and began to practice law under John T. Stewart, Mary Todd's cousin. Lincoln emerged as a formidable trial combatant during cross-examinations and closing arguments. He partnered several years with Stephen T. Logan, and in 1844 began his practice with William Herndon, a studious young man. True to his record, Lincoln professed to friends in 1861 to be an old-line Whig, a disciple of Henry Clay. Their party favored economic modernization and banking, tariffs to fund internal improvements including railroads, and urbanization. In 1843 Lincoln sought the Whig nomination for Illinois' 7th District seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was defeated by John J. Hardin, though he prevailed with the party in limiting Hardin to 1 term. Lincoln not only pulled off his strategy of gaining the nomination in 1846, but also won election. He was the only Whig in the Illinois delegation, but as dutiful as any, participated in almost all votes and made speeches that toed the party line. He was assigned to the Committee on Post Office and Post Roads and the Committee on Expenditures in the War Department. Lincoln teamed with Joshua R. Giddings on a bill to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia with compensation for the owners, enforcement to capture fugitive slaves, and a popular vote on the matter. He dropped the bill when it eluded Whig support. On foreign and military policy, Lincoln spoke against the Mexican-American War, which he imputed to President James K. Polk's desire for military glory, that attractive rainbow, that rises in showers of blood. He supported the Wilmot Proviso, a failed proposal to ban slavery in any U.S. territory won from Mexico. Lincoln emphasized his opposition to Polk by drafting and introducing his spot resolutions. The war had begun with the Mexican slaughter of American soldiers in territory disputed by Mexico, and Polk insisted that Mexican soldiers had invaded our territory and shed the blood of our fellow citizens on our soil. Lincoln demanded that Polk show Congress the exact spot on which blood had been shed and prove that the spot was on American soil. The resolution was ignored in both Congress and the national papers, and it cost Lincoln political support in his district. One Illinois newspaper derisively nicknamed him Spotty Lincoln. Lincoln later regretted some of his statements, especially his attack on presidential war-making powers. Lincoln had pledged in 1846 to serve only one term in the House. Realizing Clay was unlikely to win the presidency, he supported General Zachary Taylor for the Whig nomination in the 1848 presidential election. Taylor won, and Lincoln hoped in vain to be appointed Commissioner of the General Land Office. The administration offered to appoint him Secretary or Governor of the Oregon Territory as consolation. This distant territory was a Democratic stronghold, and acceptance of the post would have disrupted his legal and political career in Illinois, so he declined and resumed his law practice. In his Springfield practice, Lincoln handled every kind of business that could come before a prairie lawyer. Twice a year he appeared for 10 consecutive weeks in county seats in the mid-state county courts. This continued for 16 years. Lincoln handled transportation cases in the midst of the nation's western expansion, particularly river barge conflicts under the many new railroad bridges. As a riverboat man, Lincoln initially favored those interests, but ultimately represented whoever hired him. He later represented a bridge company against a riverboat company in a landmark case involving a canal boat that sank after hitting a bridge. In 1849, he received a patent for a flotation device for the movement of boats in shallow water. The idea was never commercialized, but it made Lincoln the only president to hold a patent. Lincoln appeared before the Illinois Supreme Court in 175 cases. He was sole counsel in 51 cases, of which 31 were decided in his favor. From 1853 to 1860, one of his largest clients was the Illinois Central Railroad. His legal reputation gave rise to the nickname Honest Abe. Lincoln argued in an 1858 criminal trial, defending William Duff Armstrong, who was on trial for the murder of James Preston Metzger. The case is famous for Lincoln's use of a fact established by judicial notice to challenge the credibility of an eyewitness. After an opposing witness testified to seeing the crime in the moonlight, Lincoln produced a farmer's almanac showing the moon was at a low angle, drastically reducing visibility. Armstrong was acquitted. Leading up to his presidential campaign, Lincoln elevated his profile in an 1859 murder case, with his defense of Simeon Quinn Peachy Harrison, who was a third cousin. Harrison was also the grandson of Lincoln's political opponent, Reverend Peter Cartwright. Harrison was charged with the murder of Greek Crafton, who, as he lay dying of his wounds, confessed to Cartwright that he had provoked Harrison. Lincoln angrily protested the judge's initial decision to exclude Cartwright's testimony about the confession as inadmissible hearsay. Lincoln argued that the testimony involved a dying declaration and was not subject to the hearsay rule. Instead of holding Lincoln in contempt of court as expected, the judge, a Democrat, reversed his ruling and admitted the testimony into evidence, resulting in Harrison's acquittal. The debate over the status of slavery in the territories failed to alleviate tensions between the slaveholding South and the free North, with the failure of the Compromise of 1850, a legislative package designed to address the issue. In his 1852 eulogy for Clay, Lincoln highlighted the latter's support for gradual emancipation and opposition to both extremes on the slavery issue. As the slavery debate in the Nebraska and Kansas territories became particularly acrimonious, Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas proposed popular sovereignty as a compromise. The measure would allow the electorate of each territory to decide the status of slavery. The legislation alarmed many Northerners, who sought to prevent the resulting spread of slavery, but Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act narrowly passed Congress in May 1854. Lincoln did not comment on the act until months later in his Peoria speech in October 1854. Lincoln then declared his opposition to slavery, which he repeated en route to the presidency. The new Republican Party was formed as a Northern party dedicated to anti-slavery, drawing from the anti-slavery wing of the Whig Party, and combining Free Soil, Liberty, and anti-slavery Democratic Party members. Lincoln resisted early Republican entreaties, fearing that the new party would become a platform for extreme abolitionists. Lincoln held out hope for rejuvenating the Whigs, though he lamented his party's growing closeness with the nativist Know-Nothing movement. In 1854 Lincoln was elected to the Illinois legislature but declined to take his seat. The year's elections showed the strong opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and in the aftermath, Lincoln sought election to the United States Senate. At that time, senators were elected by the state legislature. After leading in the first 6 rounds of voting, he was unable to obtain a majority. Lincoln instructed his backers to vote for Lyman Trumbull. Trumbull was an anti-slavery Democrat, and had received few votes in the earlier ballots. His supporters, also anti-slavery Democrats, had vowed not to support any Whig. Lincoln's decision to withdraw enabled his Whig supporters and Trumbull's anti-slavery Democrats to combine and defeat the mainstream Democratic candidate, Joel Aldrich Madison. Violent political confrontations in Kansas continued, and opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act remained strong throughout the North. As the 1856 elections approached, Lincoln joined the Republicans and attended the Bloomington Convention, which formally established the Illinois Republican Party. The convention platform endorsed Congress's right to regulate slavery and Douglas while honoring Lincoln's dictate to make no contracts that bind me. As the slave power tightened its grip on the national government, most Republicans agreed with Lincoln that the North was the aggrieved party. Throughout the 1850s, Lincoln had doubted the prospects of civil war, and his supporters rejected claims that his election would incite secession. When Douglas was selected as the candidate of the Northern Democrats, delegates from 11 slave states walked out of the Democratic Convention. They opposed Douglas's position on popular sovereignty, and selected incumbent Vice President John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. A group of former Whigs and Know-Nothings formed the Constitutional Union Party and nominated John Bell of Tennessee. Lincoln and Douglas competed for votes in the North, while Bell and Breckinridge primarily found support in the South. Prior to the Republican Convention, the Lincoln campaign began cultivating a nationwide youth organization, the Wide Awake's, which it used to generate popular support throughout the country to spearhead voter registration drives, thinking that new voters and young voters tended to embrace new parties. Lincoln's ideas of abolishing slavery grew, drawing more supporters. People of the northern states knew the southern states would vote against Lincoln and rallied supporters for Lincoln. As Douglas and the other candidates campaigned, Lincoln gave no speeches, relying on the enthusiasm of the Republican Party. The party did the legwork that produced majorities across the North, and produced an abundance of campaign posters, leaflets, and newspaper editorials. Republican speakers focused first on the party platform, and second on Lincoln's life story, emphasizing his childhood poverty. The goal was to demonstrate the power of free labor, which allowed a common farm boy to work his way to the top by his own efforts. The Republican Party's production of campaign literature dwarfed the combined opposition. A Chicago Tribune writer produced a pamphlet that detailed Lincoln's life, and sold 100,000 to 200,000 copies. On November 6, 1860, Lincoln was elected the 16th president. He was the first Republican president, and his victory was entirely due to his support in the North and West. No ballots were cast for him in 10 of the 15 southern slave states, and he won only 2 of 996 counties in all the southern states. Lincoln received 1,866,452 votes, or 39.8% of the total in a four-way race, carrying the free northern states, as well as California and Oregon. His victory in the Electoral College was decisive. Lincoln had 180 votes to 123 for his opponents. In response to Lincoln's election, secessionists implemented plans to leave the Union before he took office in March 1861. On December 20, 1860, South Carolina took the lead by adopting an ordinance of secession. By February 1, 1861, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. 6 of these states declared themselves to be a sovereign nation, the Confederate States of America, and adopted a constitution. The Upper South and border states initially rejected the secessionist appeal. President Buchanan and President-elect Lincoln refused to recognize the Confederacy, declaring secession illegal. The Confederacy selected Jefferson Davis as its provisional president on February 9, 1861. Attempts at compromise followed, but Lincoln and the Republicans rejected the proposed Crittenden Compromise as contrary to the party's platform of free soil in the territories. Lincoln tacitly supported the Corwin Amendment to the Constitution, which passed Congress and was awaiting ratification by the states when Lincoln took office. That doomed amendment would have protected slavery in states where it already existed. A few weeks before the war, Lincoln sent a letter to every governor informing them Congress had passed a joint resolution to amend the Constitution. En route to his inauguration, Lincoln addressed crowds and legislatures across the North. The president-elect evaded suspected assassins in Baltimore. On February 23, 1861, he arrived in disguise in Washington, D.C., which was placed under substantial military guard. Lincoln directed his inaugural address to the South, proclaiming once again that he had no inclination to abolish slavery in the southern states. Lincoln cited his plans for banning the expansion of slavery as the key source of conflict between North and South. The failure of the Peace Conference of 1861 signaled that legislative compromise was impossible. By March 1861, no leaders of the insurrection had proposed rejoining the Union on any terms. Meanwhile, Lincoln and the Republican leadership agreed that the dismantling of the Union could not be tolerated. Major Robert Anderson, commander of the Union's Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, sent a request for provisions to Washington, and Lincoln's order to meet that request was seen by the secessionists as an act of war. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Union troops at Fort Sumter and began the fight. Historian Alan Nevins argued that the newly inaugurated Lincoln made three miscalculations: underestimating the gravity of the crisis, exaggerating the strength of Unionist sentiment in the South, and overlooking Southern Unionist opposition to an invasion. William Tecumseh Sherman talked to Lincoln during Inauguration Week and was sadly disappointed at his failure to realize that the country was sleeping on a volcano and that the South was preparing for war.